Our industry is absolutely insane right now. These commission lawsuits and these settlements that happened earlier in the year, the rubber hit the road this week. How much are you going to get paid for helping a buyer find a house this week? Some people had no idea. They didn't know. And the buyers didn't know how much they were going to have to pay their agent. Good morning. This is Lance Kenmore with the Kenmore team, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's edition of the Tri-Cities Real Estate Update. As always, you can contact me, Lance Kenmore, anytime direct on my cell phone at 509-727-8977 or visit us on the web at kenmoreteam.com. Once again, I always like to thank John for hosting and everybody here at the station for working to make this happen. Mr. John McKay, how you doing over there?
Oh, keeping busy, and I'm happy because we're supposed to drop into the 80s next week.
Oh, you're liking that, aren't you? Yeah, it's finally probably. Yeah, it's time for a little coolness for sure. I do enjoy the heat. We've had a great time and enjoyed some of those patio evenings in Tri-Cities that are so fantastic with the weather. But yeah, I'll take your 80s and be okay with that. So that will be good for us for sure. Well, we always like to start off with our crazy celebrity house story. And so this one just hit the market in Las Vegas, and it was originally owned by the Magician Lance Burton. Great name, Lance, by the way, McKay, right? So,
of course.
Here's the quote. When he built this house, he said, "Build me a house Dracula would be proud to live in." It is 14,000 square feet and on the market for $10 million.
Wow.
Now, it sounds like a lot, but the square footage you get in Vegas for that, I mean, we're talking $675 a square foot. Mm-hmm. I actually don't think you could build it for that. What's probably most impressive is that it has a 2-story library in it and then a theater stage for performing, where Lance would have some of his friends and people from the Las Vegas Strip out to his house, and they would do private performances at this house. It was sold in 2021 for $4 million. At the end of one of his runs and contracts, and with COVID happening and shutting down the Strip at that point, he basically sold and then moved back to his family's original homestead back in Kentucky.
Okay.
So this buyer had bought it, done some upgrades, including a life-size chessboard in the backyard.
Yeah, like straight out of Harry Potter.
Straight out of Harry Potter, for sure. So some very, very cool pictures. It looks like a castle, and then it has some modern tweaks to it where it has kind of the half moon semicircle type roofing. So pretty awesome place. If you've ever wanted to own the house of a magician and feel like a magician, this would be the place for you. Mm-hmm. Well, we always like to temper that with a local real estate story that hits home a little bit. And I got to tell you, the story from last week was rates. Interest rates, but it's been a little bit of a roller coaster. So we actually saw on Tuesday this last week, we saw rates on 30-year mortgages get down to 5.99. I saw quotes for a couple days. Now, what's crazy about the volatility right now, though, is that by the end of the week, by yesterday, rates were back up to, I saw some 6.375s and some 6.4s. So pretty crazy to go almost a swing of a half a point within a singular week. So people out there that haven't locked your mortgages, if you're in a build and you're waiting to lock, if your lender calls you, take the call, because it might change quickly and they might be calling you to lock at a lower rate. But I will tell you, if we get rate swings back down in those high fives again, we see a rush of activity. And we had a really, really busy week with listings going under contract and buyers taking advantage of that for sure. So if we can keep rates there, we will see some happy buyers coming into the fall, with homes becoming more affordable because of the rates. So, John, our industry is absolutely insane right now. And we've been talking all year about major changes in the industry and what that looks like. And Washington was kind of ahead of the curve on some of that. But these commission lawsuits and these settlements that happened earlier in the year, the rubber hit the road this week.
Yes.
And this was the week in the Tri-Cities MLS where some agents and some buyers, how much are you going to get paid for helping a buyer find a house? This week, some people had no idea. They didn't know. And the buyers didn't know how much they were going to have to pay their agent because new rules went into effect. And we talked about how are those lawsuits in the previous year going to affect what actually happens in real estate.
Yes.
Well, new rules went into effect. And I'm going to read to you direct from our MLS board what these rules are. And the PACMLS rule change that was after August 1st, because these changes by the settlement are mandated to be put into place by August 17th. PACMLS is a little bit ahead of the curve, got these in early. But it says, there shall be no mention of any financial compensation, financial incentives, or commission information included in any confidential remarks fields or the listing published in the MLS database. So that means at this point in time, when you sit down and meet with the seller, in the past, what you've said to the seller is you said, okay, we're going to look at a commission rate of X. And what we have to decide is what that rate's going to be. And then, Mr. Seller, how much of that you're going to pay me to act as your listing agent? And then how much do you want to offer to entice buyer agents to bring buyers to your house for the buyer agent commission? Well, part of our decoupling of commissions has been all of our forms changed at the beginning of the year in Washington. And by decoupling those, part of it has been now that rate is spelled out to how much you're going to pay your agent when you're a seller is on the listing side. And then completely separated to a different line item, another percentage that you're going to offer buyer agents. Also, no longer a requirement to offer that compensation to buyer's agents. And hence, at the beginning of the year, we started using buyer agency agreements where buyers are negotiating that directly with their buyer agent. However, what's been going on for the last 8 months is we have had the ability still for sellers to advertise additional compensation that they would cover for the buyer to pay the buyer's agent. So when you went to show a listing, you would know what they were offering to the buyer agent. And if Mr. Buyer, you and your agent had worked out an agreement, any amount the seller was offering would be less that you would have to come out of pocket with at closing. Well, now what they've found and determined as part of the settlement is they believe that by advertising that in the MLS, that is continuing the old practices that have been happening, and this is how they're going to help decouple those commission rates. The argument there is that if you have an agreement with your buyer, what do you care what the seller's offering? This is what they're trying to push in that situation. So this comes down from the settlement agreements that were done with commission lawsuits earlier in the year. And part of that settlement agreement was agreeing to these rules. So coming directly out of the National Association of Realtors, from their chief legal officer, the direct quote that we're getting is, we recommend all MLSs implement practice changes by August 17th. Realtor MLSs owned exclusively by one or more realtor member boards must implement the changes to be in compliance with NAR policy. Offers of compensation are prohibited on MLSs. So what's interesting about this is you have an agreement that was made in a settlement, and then within that same language, you have how that party feels about that settlement. And what they say is offers of compensation help make homeownership and the benefits of professional representation more accessible to buyers, including first-time home buyers, increase home ownership opportunities for historically underserved groups, and benefit sellers by expanding the potential buyer pool. So it's saying we can't advertise that within the MLS, what we're going to be paying those other agents. But we really think it's a good idea if we do. So you can kind of see where we're stuck in this very weird situation. And a lot of our agreements state with our buyers, our new buyer agency agreements state that if the seller is cooperating and paying some of that, it says specifically it reduces the obligation that the buyer's going to pay. So, for instance, you might have an agreement with the buyer. You might charge a buyer, 2% to go find houses for them. And that's a contract you have with your buyer, regardless of what the seller's paying. Well, sellers used to be able to advertise, hey, I'm offering 2% or I'm offering 3% for you to bring a buyer. And so you would say to the buyer in that situation, well, hey, this particular house, they're offering 2%. You're not going to have to come up with that out of pocket. That reduces the 2% that you and I agreed to, so you're not coming out of pocket with it. Well, now buyers are stuck in a little bit of a quandary because there's no easy way for them to know when they're going to look at these houses. Now, I will say there is another step. It is not illegal by the settlement to text somebody or to send them, the information or email them the information about the house. Or for that matter, to have a sign in the front yard saying how much they're paying buyer's agent. It just is prohibited. It can't be in the MLS. So what this does is it creates a whole nother step. So when you're a buyer's agent, like it's pretty normal for me when I'm showing houses to a buyer. Buyer wants to see 3 houses. I'll text the agent before we go see any of those 3, and I'll say, do you currently have any offers on the house? Is it still available? Is there anything else I should know about the house before showing it? Pretty normal that I would, before any showing, ask those 3 questions. So now we've added to that list, and now what we're asking is, what's the buyer agent CoOp? Is the seller offering any buyer agent CoOp? Because then we can let our buyer know, for this particular house, what's your obligation going to be? Will there be extra money out of pocket for my fee as your agent, or will that be covered by the seller? So what happens is sellers have to make a decision, because the point of these national lawsuits and national commissions is they believe that overall they're going to lower the price of home selling for sellers. That was the crux of the whole lawsuit. Okay. And giving consumers transparent choices. I have a big argument, though, against the transparency of not having this in the MLS, but that's probably another radio show. But people are asking me, Lance, with these changes and with what's going on, from a practical standpoint, what's changed in the market, and what do you see happening with this change of not having this CoOp percentage in there? And so there's a couple different things that we've got to look at. From a practical standpoint, good agents right now are just doing more work. They're doing a better job researching what is that CoOp, what does it look like, and they're keeping their buyers informed. So even though the system's not willing to tell us, they can still text each other, they can still call, they can still figure out what that is. So they're just taking that extra step to keep people informed. So sellers now, on the other hand, though, are asking me all the time, well, if it's not going in the MLS, should I offer a CoOp percentage to that other agent? Or should I just pay your side, Lance? So we have to sit down and have a discussion on what's right for the seller. And since, I've talked to a lot of agents in town about this, and my gut reaction is that since a lot of agents are texting and asking what it is, my gut reaction is there's a reason why they're doing that, and it's because it makes a difference to their buyers. And so I take people back to what the NAR's position on this was, and that was that they believe that it makes professional representation more available to buyers, and it also helps increase the amount of exposure to first-time home buyers that are working with agents. So you look at that and say, what do I want to do? Do I want to make this home more attractive to sell, just neutral, or less attractive? So you have to look at then too, what's the market like right now? And that's, to me, the biggest indication right now is what is your competition doing and how are you going to compete when you're on the market? That's probably the biggest issue. So when we look from a seller's and I had some great clients in my office earlier this week, and she sat down and she said, well, Lance, is it my very first question as I look at these offers, is it a seller's market or a buyer's market? And I said, well, that's a great question. I said, and so I'm going to give you the answer to that question from an overall perspective, but then there's going to be an asterisk. So the overall is that it's still slightly a seller's market because we define an equal market as about 5 months of inventory.
Yeah.
5 to 6 months. And so what that means is we look at the number of active listings on the market. We divide that by the number that have sold in the last month. That tells us how many months of inventory we have. And right now, we're at about 900 actives on the market and about 300 a month selling. So we've got about a 3-month supply. 6 months ago, that was a 2.5 month supply. 6 months prior to that, that was a 1.5 month supply. And so we've got to look at that. But the asterisk that I put on that I say is, it still might slightly be in a seller's position, but not in every price range. That's the first asterisk. And the second one is that 900 actives in the Tri-Cities is the most inventory that we have had since when, McKay?
I'm going to say pre-COVID. Am I correct?
You're right, but it's way before that.
I'm going to say 8 years.
Okay, so
Was I right?
I went back through all of the spreadsheets painstakingly, mind you, and it was December of 2014.
Wow.
10 years was the last time that Tri-Cities had 900 actives. So, number one, most of the agents you might be dealing with, they weren't even in the business back then. So if they're trying to tell you what to do in that situation, I argue they might not even know what that situation is.
Yeah.
And so you have to look at that and say, okay, what was it like in that situation and what was happening? Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. Side note, by the way, I also peeked at the average price. Back then in 2014, and it was $216,000 was the average price that month of sales. So that's changed a little bit as well. But when you look at that, the number one thing I say to people is when you start to have that many choices as a buyer, you have to go back to some old school real estate. And that is looking at the 4 big things that are going to sell your house. And really at a high level, we've got price, condition, location, and marketing.
Yes.
And I've done shows, I could do a whole show on each one of those. But what we're talking about with this CoOp, in my opinion, boils down to price. Because we're going to look, the buyer's going to pay that commission one way or another. And you can look at that. They're either going to pay it out of pocket with cash because there's no financing it yet. I think the lending industry is, everybody's trying to figure this out, but they're not going to find. So they're either going to pay that out of pocket, the builder or the seller's going to take less, or the price of the home is going to go up some. And so you've got to look at what form that's in. At the end of the day, that's always price, whether it's a lower price or lower amount. So for me, that discussion for you as a seller when you're deciding what to do is really a discussion of price, like where you're wanting to market the house at and sell it. The second thing is condition. And why do I say condition? Because in this market, now that there's 900 actives, I will tell you exactly what happens. When there's 900 actives, all of the sudden, Lance has builders in his building being very nice to him. When they sell the house without even putting up a sign, they don't have to come to my office and talk to me. They don't need the business. They don't need the traffic. They just put up a sign and there's 8 buyers standing out there and then they sell it. Well, when there's 900 actives on the market, some of those builders are very aggressive and they start coming out to agents and saying, guess what? We can't advertise in the MLS that there's a co-op, but there's a co-op. And so when your buyer comes to see us, they're not going to pay it out of pocket. So very aggressive buyers might have already been at my office to get ahead of this and are doing that. And so that's how they're advertising when they can't in the MLS. Mm-hmm. And so you look at that situation and you say, okay, they're trying to win on price in that situation. The problem you have as a seller now, if you're in a resale position, the new construction is offering a co-op and your condition of your house is going to be compared to new construction because it'll always be based upon that as the alternative. Mm-hmm. If they don't buy your house, what are they going to go buy? And if new construction is priced even close to where yours is, they're probably going to choose that new construction house. So condition is the other one. And then I wrote down location. I put that the last 4 years has been the only time out of the 24 years in the business where location mattered less. And let me tell you why, because when there's only 200 homes on the market, location doesn't matter. Backs up to a busy street, I don't care. It's got 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. That's what I need. I'll take it. Location starts to matter more the more homes that are on the market.
Yes.
Because now you've got the same amenities at the same price, but you don't have to take that one that's on a busy street. So everybody listening is like, well, my house is on a busy street. How are you going to sell it? Take you back to point number 1, price. That's how we're going to sell it, is price, because now it has to be accurate. That's why location is on my list. So now location matters again. It didn't the last 4 years. It does now. I'm telling you, it very much does now. And then the last one is marketing. How are you communicating to that out there to the world? Are you getting thousands of people to see it on social media, or are you just sticking a sign in the yard and praying? So we have to look at that and say what's happening with marketing in that situation. So for me, this discussion about what's going on in the MLS, it's just old school real estate. Like there's a lot of people freaking out online, most of them not in Washington because we started talking about this 8 months ago. But it is a big change for us not having that co-op in there. And so we've added it to our checklist. We're paying attention to that. We're helping buyers navigate what that looks like so they're properly prepared. It's confusing. John and I were talking at the break, and John, you very well said, this sounds confusing, Lance, and I will tell you, based upon the questions I've been answering in the last week, the consumer is confused. And so we're trying to navigate through them and what that looks like. You'll get very honest, straightforward advice to what we think is happening when you sit down with us. If you have any questions about that, please come and see us. We're easy to find. Go to kenmoreteam.com, shoot us a message, or stop in at our office and see us. And we'll be right back here next week.
Right here on News Talk 870.